Hello everyone, this will be the first part of my introduction to PvP guides, as requested by multiple people. This part will focus on the core concepts of PvP that any new player should know before they start. As for future parts, I'll be working on a basic matchup knowledge guide and a node war and siege guide. So let's start right away with the PvP concepts. The first things we'll be looking at are the skills. These are the identity of your class. To know how to PvP properly, you need to know your skills properly. Skills have multiple information, categories, and types. So here's what you need to know. Starting off with protections, there's 3 types: super armor, frontal guard, and iframe. Skills can also have no protection, and sometimes they'll change protection type mid-cast. What's important to know for PvP is the difference between each protection. Frontal guards are tied to your block couch. While this couch doesn't hit 0, all hits from the front will be invalidated. That means you'll take no damage and you won't get CC'd. Obviously, the weakness of this protection is that if the enemy gets behind you, he can hit you. Super armors, on the other hand, give you a complete immunity to CCs, meaning you can still take damage, although it will be reduced depending on the amount of super armor damage reduction that your class has. In general, super armor is the most important protection in large scale because if you don't have a super armor combo, especially as a melee class, you can't really get damage out. Super armor has 2 weaknesses though. Even though you can't get CC'd, there is a special case, which is grabs, that can actually connect with you. And the other weakness is that because you're still taking damage while in super armor, you can just die on these skills if you're not careful. Finally, iframes make you completely invulnerable to both CCs and damage, which is obviously broken. However, this protection is mostly applied to mobility skills or skills that don't actually hit the opponent. So when the enemy is on iframe, usually it's not doing damage or using CCs on you. A core aspect of skills is the crowd control they inflict. You'll hear everyone refer to crowd control for CC on short. Skills that CC are skills that when they hit your opponent will make them unable to perform actions. On BDO, that only happens if the enemy is not protected. But if you do land a CC, you then open up the opportunity to start a combo, which can then kill the opponent. So let's go over the CC types first. In BDO, there are 6 main CC types that skills can have: knockdowns, floats, bounce, stuns, stiffness, and knockback. All these CCs act differently. Knockdowns are the strongest CCs and will ground your opponent for roughly 4 seconds. Floats will launch your enemy into the air before grounding them and will last roughly 2.5 seconds. Bounce are a worse version of knockdowns that will ground the opponent for 2.5 seconds. Stuns can only CC the enemy while he's standing and will keep the enemy CC'd for 3.5 seconds. Stiff, just like stun, can only hit while the enemy is standing and will CC the enemy for 1.5 seconds roughly. Finally, knockbacks, just like stiff and stun, only work if the enemy is standing and will CC the enemy for 2 seconds. These CCs can be divided on the concept of hard and soft CCs. This is because there is a limit to the amount of CCs in a row that you can apply to the same opponent. This is called a CC cap, and here's how it works. Whenever someone is CC'd, a CC count will start with a timer of 5 seconds. The CC count value will go up by 1 whenever a hard CC lands, and it will go up by 0.7 whenever a soft CC lands. If the CC counter ever reaches 2 or higher, that person will then become immune to CCs for 5 seconds. Otherwise, if the timer runs out, it resets back to 0. What this basically means is that when you're fighting someone, you can only apply 2 hard CCs, or 2 hard CCs and a soft CC, in a span of 5 seconds. There is also 3 special CC types: grabs, freezing, and vacuums. Grabs can CC an enemy even if he's in super armor. Only some classes have access to it. A grab always has a 0.3 seconds wind-up animation that is unprotected. And then, if it succeeds or fails, it's super armor. The grabs also have a CC type, which is the CC type that will be applied at the end of the grab. Usually it's either a bound or a knockdown. Another special CC type is freezing. This one is very rare and only present for witches, wizards, and Nova, if I'm not mistaken. When you get hit by a freeze, your character is basically disabled for 6 seconds. It also gains 90% damage reduction, making it basically just unkillable. At the end of the freeze, a CC type will then be applied. Finally, the last crowd control is vacuums. This doesn't really disable your character, but it keeps pulling you in towards the source of the vacuum. All vacuums right now also have a slow on top of it, making it a very annoying CC type. For the most part, the only way to get out of vacuums is to cast long distance iframes, and even then, against some classes, that doesn't work too well sometimes. The same way skills have CC types, they also have skill modifiers. First, when you're hitting an enemy, there is 4 modifiers that can appear: down attack, air attack, back attack, and critical attack. All of these increase the damage output of the skill you just hit. Down attacks proc when the enemy is in a grounded state, and if the skill has the modifier. Air attacks proc while the enemy is in launch state, usually a result of a float. And back attacks will proc if the enemy is standing and you're hitting him from the back. The final one, critical hit, depends on the critical rate of the skills that you're casting. It stacks and multiplies with the previous 3 modifiers, if they happen to proc at the same time. Down attacks and back attacks have a modifier of 1.2 extra damage, while air attacks have a modifier of 1.5 and critical hits have a modifier of 2. Skills can also have 2 CC modifiers, which are down smash and air smash. These skills can extend CC duration. If you hit an enemy on a launch state with an air smash skill, the launch state will be extended by roughly 0.5 seconds. This is usually only possible on classes that have float combos. On the other hand, down smashes do not proc 100% of the time. When you hit a grounded enemy with the down smash skill, there is a 1 in 3 chance that it extends the CC by 0.5 seconds. The last thing to note is that the CC extension from a down smash or an air smash does not affect the 5-second timer we talked about earlier. So if you manage to down smash an enemy 2 or 3 times as they were about to get up, you can actually outlast the 5-second CC immunity, and this is what's commonly known as a CC reset. If you want to experience this yourself, just go fight a Suck Valk or Awakening Mystic and you'll see the pain. Okay, to finalize this skill section, we're gonna go over some extra info that you need to know. When reading a skill tooltip, you see the damage that it does. You need to notice that not all damage is applied on PvP. Every skill has a section on the bottom that says PvP applied damage ratio. So if it says, for example, 50%, that means that skill only does half the damage on PvP. So having big damage numbers doesn't always mean that you'll have big damage on PvP with that skill. Another 2 things that are not shown in the game are SA damage reduction and class modifiers. SA damage reduction, as the name suggests, is the extra SA damage reduction you have while you're casting an SA skill. Most classes only have 10%, but a lot of the melee classes have higher values. You need to actually check the website to see these values. As for class modifiers, you also need to check the website for this information. Each class spec belongs to one of 3 categories: vanguards, skirmishers, and pulverizers. Depending on the group that you are, you do 5% extra damage to another group. Vanguards do extra 5% to pulverizers, pulverizers extra 5 to skirmishers, and skirmishers extra 5 to vanguards. Another perk that skills have is called the Hitcap. This is not to be confused with split damage. For the most part, every skill has a hit cap of 10 people. That means if you're casting a skill into more people, you won't hit all of them. On the other hand, split damage will be specifically said on the tooltip, and how it works is that when you hit multiple enemies, the damage of the skill you're doing will be reduced depending on the amount of people that you're hitting. This can be most commonly seen on ranged classes. For example, Captain Orders on Corsair has a split damage whenever you're hitting 2 or more people. The last 2 things to go over are actual skills that every class has access to. First one is Emergency Escape, commonly known as V. When you use this skill, you go in complete iframe for 5 seconds and you can reposition. This skill is basically a get out of jail free card for when you get CC'd. To note that V doesn't work against stiffs and knockbacks for some reason. The other one is Black Spirit Rage. Black Spirit Rage is a resource that gets filled as you hit people, you get hit by people, or as time passes. You can see it on the right side of your HP bar in the middle of the screen. Once Black Spirit Rage is above 100%, you can press the Z buff to absorb it. This will give you a lot of attack speed and a lot of AP. You can also press X instead to feed the rage to another target in your platoon/party. This will transfer half of your Black Spirit Rage to the target. This is important because not only the absorb mechanic exists, there's also skills that can get boosted by the Black Spirit Rage. If you're playing Succession, these are the 100% and 200% skills, which are very useful in PvP in a lot of scenarios. They're usually skills with really big damage, or then skills with really good CCs or utility. If you're playing an Awakening or a Shensen class, a lot of the times you have access not only to 100 and 200% skills, but also 10, 25 and 50%. These are usually not as good but some classes do have really good ones. For example, Awakening Warrior 50% is really broken, Scholar 10% is also really good, etc. I would also like to point out that PS has skills when they hit the opponent, wound them, reducing their max HP, as showcased on this video. Now this next section will introduce PvP concepts that are very closely tied to class guides. So before getting into it, I would like to leave a PSA. As a new player, watching a PvP class guide for your class is extremely important. Unlike PvE, where you can just face roll the keyboard a lot of the times, PvP does not work that way. Let's start off this part with combos. A combo can be summarized as a chain of skills to CC cap the opponent while doing as much damage as possible with the intent of killing the enemy. Combos usually start with the opening CC, followed by damage, a re-CC, and then more damage. When looking at the class guide, you'll learn a lot of different combos. That's because combos can be very situational. Depending on first CC you land and skills that are on cooldown, your combo will have to change, so you need to adapt to the situation. Overall, there's 4 types of combos that you'll see though. The first one is grab combos. These are the least situational ones, because when you get a grab, a lot of the times you can always follow up with the same combo. You then have half combos, which is when you get a CC, but you can't react on time or are too far away to drop burst on the first part of the CC, so you need to only burst on the second CC. Full combos, if you go by logic, is when you get 2 CCs and you manage to burst on both windows. As for the last one, the reset combos, in that one, instead of going for as much burst as possible after the CC, you try to spam down smashes and reset the opponent. When you CC reset the opponent, that means you can basically start a new combo right after. There is also a distinction between 1v1 combos and large-scale combos. That's because in large-scale, you want your combo to be mostly made up of super armor skills, and in 1v1s and small-scale, because there's less people, you can position yourself better, and therefore unprotected skills and frontal guard skills can be applied with less risk to a combo. Moving on to mobility. This is also a core aspect you'll learn in class guides. In general, when you look at mobility, you want to know 2 things. The first one is the mobility strings for your class. Mobility string is when you chain multiple movement skills to move you from point A to point B. You want to know by heart which mobility strings are protected, unprotected, which ones are better for large distance movement, and which ones are better for short distance movement. While some classes do not need to worry about this at all, for other classes this aspect is make or break. As a quick example, Corsair has different mobility strings, depending if you want quick burst movement, long distance burst movement, long distance sustained movement, short distance protected movement, etc. The other core aspect of mobility is stamina management. You need to know which skills use the most stamina, which skills recover stamina, and which skills don't recover stamina. This is very important on a lot of classes. However, unlike in PvE, where a lot of times you can just spam whatever skill and recover stamina because the mobs don't teach you, in large scale you need to be careful because if you stop to recover stamina, you open yourself up to either get CC'd or just die in SA. This is one of the hardest things to master on a lot of classes and also one of the most important, as some classes are genuinely unplayable if you don't manage their stamina. The next topic is super armor. When watching a class guide, there is 2 concepts you much likely will find. The first one is super armor rotation. As you might have guessed, this means casting super armor skills to stay protected and avoid getting CC'd. Although the name is SA rotation, iframes do get included on this rotation most times. Some classes have genuine full SA rotations, where they never need to drop protection unless they want to get the CC, start a combo, or run out of stamina. Other classes actually have downtime on their SA rotations, which for the most part also means that these classes are technically easier to punish. However, in some cases, for example, if your class has high mobility, you don't need a full SA rotation. You can just go in, drop a couple SA skills, and then back out, and a lot of classes can't even keep up with you. This concept is what you can call SA trading, and is basically what PvP consists of 90% of the time right now. To summarize SA trading, is when you use SA skills to try and do damage to an enemy that is also in SA. Probably 70% of the matchups right now that don't have grab come down to this core aspect. You need to know how to trade your opponent to force his HP down and then force mistakes that will actually result in a kill. If we take it even a step further, as you get better at PvP and your class, you'll then start doing a mix-up between frontal guard trading and SA trading. Frontal guard trading is trading with frontal guard skills, That means you won't take damage back if you position it correctly. Obviously, trading with frontal guards is high risk, high reward, because you can get CC'd. So knowing your class matchup and when to go for a safe frontal guard trade is one of the most important things on PvP. Let's move on to buffs, debuffs, and passives. For the most part, when PvPing, you always want to have 100% uptime on your buffs, like evasion, cast speed, attack power, damage reduction, etc. The same way, you also want to know which skills exactly apply debuffs to your enemy. For example, when doing a combo, you always want to debuff your enemy with minus damage reduction or minus evasion. Or, on the case we talked earlier, a vacuum can slow down the enemy, making it easier to catch. There's also passives that can make or break your class. For example, Suck Sage has access to a skill that lets him reset their cooldowns. Seraph regenerates Black Spirit Rage faster. Crusair has a passive that applies anti-block regen to the enemy. All classes also have base stat passives that usually increase the stats that they should have, like more evasion and damage reduction if they're supposed to be tanky, or more AP and cast speed if they're supposed to do damage. The final concept we're gonna explore is neutral play. This can be applied across every PvP content, regardless of the skill. Neutral play is the concept of how you play a class while there is no CCs, no engages, and no hard commitments going on in the fight. For the most part, it consists of 4 main activities. Number 1, pre-buffing. You want to keep your buffs up. Therefore, if your class has pre-buffs, you want to refresh them in a safe way as much as possible. Number 2, CC fishing. CC fishing is trying to look for opportunities to CC your opponent, usually throwing out fast CCs or protected ones. Number 3, asset rotating. During the neutral play, you want to be as protected as possible. You don't want to be caught lacking and get CC'd yourself. You also want to do this while preserving as much stamina as possible most times, and if you're playing large scale, not only do you need the stamina, but you also need to preserve a lot of the times long distance movements so you can engage as the shot caller calls it. You also want to be careful to not get stuck on a skill that you can't cancel, as that can lead to you getting grabbed. And finally, number 4, trading. During the neutral game, you always want to look for opportunities to get damage on the back of your enemy during long animations, mobility skills, or low damage skills. This obviously comes down to a lot of matchup knowledge. The neutral game ends when someone gets his seed or you try to force an engage. This means you might need to peel for a teammate, you might have to do a combo, or be forced to use unsafe skills and CCs. Finally, still on the topic of class guides, I want to summarize the useful information that you're going to find besides what we already mentioned. Watching a class guide will teach you what rebums to pick, what core skill to pick if you play Awakening on Ascension class. It will give you add-ons. It will teach you what skills you should lock or put on your hotbar. It will teach you how to do animation cancels. It will teach you what builds work on the class for PvP. And a lot of times, it will also teach you the playstyle of the class, depending on the content. 1v1, small scale, large scale, capped, uncapped, etc. So, after learning all of these concepts we talked about, I think you can finally watch a PvP guide on your class and understand what they're talking about, because I feel like a new player will probably not understand a lot of the things they mentioned there. I hope you guys enjoy learning PvP, and be ready for the matchup guide that will come next.